There is a specific kind of loss that you only really get with live service games. When a single player game gets patched or updated or even has a sequel, you can usually still find the old version online, or just go back and play the first game. But live service games are ones that constantly get updated, and many of them have been running for well over a decade now. The game is constantly changing every few weeks in a way that is irreversible. It's not necessarily that we can't access the old version anymore, it's just no longer playable. It doesn't exist, it's functionally gone. The MMORPG space figured this out some years ago now, and painfully at that. In April of 2016, Blizzard shut down Nostalrius, a private server running the original vanilla World of Warcraft. Over 800,000 players were registered to that, and following its closure, more than 200,000 people signed a petition demanding Blizzard to create an official version. And this time Blizzard listened, and in 2019 WoW Classic launched to massive success. Old School RuneScape is another game that tells a similar story. Jagex forced in a ton of updates with the evolution of combat that didn't resonate with a lot of players, then afterwards they held a poll which eventually led to the release of Old School RuneScape, which just as of recently is breaking records with nearly 250,000 players online simultaneously. There's kind of a pattern emerging here, isn't there? When a live service game changes enough, a certain segment of the player base does not want to move forwards, they want to go back, and if the developers won't take them there, eventually somebody from the community is just going to do it themselves. League of Legends launched in October of 2009. There will be people playing this game who were not alive when it first came out. Over 15 years since then, it's been changed almost beyond recognition, with tons of new champions, reworked maps, overhauled item systems, runes, and mechanics that bear almost no resemblance to what the game looked like in its original seasons. There are a lot of players who would really want to go back and see just what the early years of League of Legends were like, maybe for the nostalgia of revisiting them, or just to see how different the game was. And for a number of years, this almost happened. This is the story of League of Legends Classic that never was. This is Chronoshift. To understand why Chronoshift existed, you have to understand how dramatically League of Legends has changed. When the game launched, there were about 40 champions. By the end of Season 1, which ran from July 2010 to August 2011, the roster had grown to roughly 80. And by April of 2021, when Chronoshift was shut down, there were almost 155 champions in the game. And many of those original champions had been reworked, sometimes even twice. The map itself was redesigned, item systems were overhauled multiple times. The Season 1 and 2 era of the game had a completely different feel too. The old Summoner's Rift had a distinctive visual identity. It was darker, it was moodier, but it was beloved by the players who grew up with it. And it wasn't just that the game was literally different, people played it differently as well back then. In some cases, people would go duo top. The dedicated support role barely existed in its current form. The whole concept of a champion who never farms and builds nothing but utility was still being figured out, and supports funded themselves through gold generating items like Philosopher's Stone or Heart of Gold, and these supports will be spending their entire gold income on wards, Oracle's Elixir, and the utility items. It's not like today where you can just lock in random stuff as support and it'll work because you just get so much gold thrown at you. There were more summoner spells in the game too, such as Rally, Fortify, or Clairvoyance. There was a dodge mechanic, so randomly your attacks could just miss, and there was old Deathfire Grasp that let burst mages just delete people. The jungle too was just such a different beast. The camps were different in the jungle. There were no grubs, no Rift Herald, no Scuttle Crab, no Elemental Drakes, no Elder Dragon, and junglers were designed to actually be junglers who could sustain through the very high monster damage. Similar to support, you couldn't just get away with playing pretty much anything you want and having OP items and runes carry you through your first clear. Back then you had things like Nunu, Lee Sin, Warwick, Fiddle, and so on. These were champions with crazy good sustain because you needed that sustain to clear. There were no buff timers in the jungle whatsoever, you just had to keep track of when things respawned yourself, and the second blue buff spawn was just expected as a rite of passage to go to your mid laner, or they would tilt off the face of the rift. None of that resembles the game we played today. And there was something just genuinely chaotic and exciting about that era of the game, which the modern version, for all its polish and balance, cannot quite replicate. I'm sure if we did go back, things would be dramatically different due to the game knowledge, but it would still have been interesting to see how things would have really worked out. But the project which really started this movement off began in 2016. That's when, behind the scenes, Chronoshift began development. What made Chronoshift really ambitious was the team was not just modifying the live client, they were rewriting League from the very beginning. They were using client files for old versions of League of Legends that were available on Riot's own content delivery network, and they have put a ton of work into this project behind the scenes, rebuilding 65 champions along with the old Twisted Tree line, the old Summoner's Rift, the old rune system, and items from that era as well. In March of 2020, after years of quiet development, the Chronoshift team went public. They posted an announcement to Reddit describing the project, what they built, and what they'd hoped to achieve. The response from the community was enormous. Players who had been nostalgic for old League for years saw someone actually trying to do something about it, and the enthusiasm was real and immediate for this movement. Yet at the same time, Riot also noticed this huge blow-up post, and a Rioter known as Gene jumped directly into the announcement thread. His message was pretty brief and straightforward. He said, "Hijacking to say please don't do this. We have very simple and easy to read policies around developing products around Riot Games." This was the first warning to the Chronoshift team. It wasn't anything legal or formal, it wasn't a cease and desist, no lawyers were involved or anything like that. It was simply a Riot developer telling this group of hardworking fans that, hey, this isn't going to end well for you. But the Chronoshift team nevertheless pressed on. They thought they were in the right in terms of what they were doing. The Chronoshift team had already consulted with IP copyright lawyers before going public, and their conclusion was the following, which we saw in a publicly shared statement later on. They said, "To our best knowledge, the assessment of the lawyers specialized in IP copyright we talked the project over with, we have not done anything illegal." And this was because they were doing everything by themselves from scratch, and they were using information that Riot is making publicly available to anyone who could search it up. The Riot Gene comment would come back almost exactly 1 year later though, wielded as evidence that the team had been warned and had chosen to ignore it. Despite all this, development continued through 2020 and into early 2021. The project at this point in time was still in closed beta. The general public had never played it, and only a small number of community testers had been given access to help identify bugs. The team was meticulous about keeping everything internal, refusing money or donations and refusing public access. As far as they were concerned, they were being as careful as possible to get this into the public's hands. And then with the Chronoshift team barely having shown itself to the wider world, came one of the most embarrassing PR stunts you'll have seen from a company in recent memory. In April of 2021, screenshots from the Chronoshift Discord hit Reddit, and within a few hours the post absolutely exploded. What the screenshot showed were a Discord conversation between Chronoshift developer Lord Lothendran and a member of Riot's security team who identified himself as Riot Zed. During this conversation, Zed claimed that Riot's team had archives of chat channels the Chronoshift developers had tried to delete, implying they were actively watching them. And Zed's tone throughout this entire conversation was embarrassing at best. He said, "You've obviously put a lot of work into Chronoshift, but I assure you that the Chrono break is coming." When Lord Lothendran asked Zed to drop the theatrics, the demands became more explicit. Hand over the Chronoshift website, the source code, and all identifiable information shared between members of the team. He said, "In short, give me what I'm looking for and we won't sue, refuse and we will. An ultimatum." Lord Lothendran of course pushed back, asking exactly what Zed intended to accuse him of. The response was that basically Zed didn't really have any involvement with the legal side of this, and he said, "I'm on the security team, I find people and things." This prompted that the next step would be through Riot's official legal team, not a member of the security team reaching out through Discord randomly. Though on his way out, Zed had one final line to remember him by: "I wish I could say it's been a pleasure." When this hit the Reddit, the Chronoshift team were claiming that Riot had tried to extort them into handing over their code and website. The demands for the source code, the veiled surveillance claims, and the ultimatum were just weird coming over Discord, especially from a company as large and recognizable as Riot Games. In fact, a lot of people questioned whether this conversation was even genuine, it seemed so out of touch. Nevertheless, this conversation essentially forced Riot's hand. Not only did they now have to follow up to what had happened in this conversation, but they had to unfortunately confirm that this conversation was real and that Zed was a genuine Riot employee. But the company were very quick to distance itself from the tone, saying we're disappointed with the tenor of the conversation and we'll be addressing this internally. Just a few days later, on April 26th of 2021, the actual lawyer messages dropped. Riot's legal counsel sent a formal cease and desist letter to the Chronoshift development team. The letter demanded to halt all development, have a complete shutdown of the server, and the removal of all social media presence related to Chronoshift. It also reiterated the demand for all the source code, describing Riot's intellectual properties as extremely valuable and making clear that the company was taking the matter seriously. The development team complied with this demand, and their final statement described Chronoshift as a time capsule for something long gone that people still express a lot of interest in to this day. In fact, just after the letter arrived, Norak, one of the Chronoshift leads, spoke to Kotaku. He confirmed that it is unlikely the server will be returning. He also made another very good point. Imagine if Blizzard prevented modding of StarCraft or Warcraft 3. So many great maps and games would have never existed, including League of Legends. Riot stood on the shoulders of giants, climbed a ladder they were holding to the top, and then pulled that ladder up from beneath them. And as of today, there is no official League of Legends legacy server, no announcement of one, and the community threads asking why Riot could not do what Blizzard have done have gone unanswered. And Chronoshift is not even unique in this regard. League of Memories and League Sandbox were both shut down before it. There is a version of this story where Riot looks at Chronoshift the way that Blizzard eventually looked at Nostarius, as a signal or a proof of concept. Blizzard resisted the idea of doing Classic WoW for years. People started talking about it in 2014. They dismissed it as not worth the effort and though it wouldn't be financially viable. The funny thing is here, the man at Riot who said the legacy server for League of Legends wouldn't be worth the development effort was Greg Street, also known as Ghostcrawler, and he had spent 6 years as the lead system designer on World of Warcraft at Blizzard before joining Riot in 2013. He had watched Blizzard resist the Classic server idea from the inside. He would then watch WoW Classic become one of Blizzard's biggest commercial wins when they finally did it in 2019, and Riot's conclusion was still no, it's not going to be worth it, and if you're a fan trying to release that server, you can't do that either. In the end, for companies like Blizzard, they did listen to the players and give them the old game back, and it has paid off for them massively. Riot had that same conversation sitting in front of them and they chose differently. Whether a League Classic would have worked, and whether the nostalgia was deep enough to sustain its own game, we will simply never know. It was going to be a Chronoshift for League of Legends, the ability to go back in time, but Riot made sure the clock never stopped. What do you reckon though? Did you ever get a chance to play Chronoshift? And do you think a League of Legends Classic could have potentially worked out for them long term? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.